structures of the sheep brain and eye. This is the last lab in the second unit. We're going to begin with the structures of the sheep brain, covering them in the same order that they're in their lab manual. And we'll begin by looking at the external features of the sheep brain. Here at the upper surface here, this convoluted, highly folded portion is called the cerebrum. Just behind the cerebrum, this other large structure here, is the cerebellum. The two portions of the cerebrum are divided by a groove here. This deep groove is called the great longitudinal fissure between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. We have another fissure which divides the cerebrum from the cerebellum. So just this indentation here, this division line, this would be the transverse fissure.
Transverse fissure.
The cerebrum is divided up into lobes, the same way that you divide up the bones of the skull, and they're named in the same fashion. So we have a frontal lobe here on each side, parietal lobe, sides of the cerebrum, the temporal lobe, kind of stuck a little bit down underneath here, and the occipital lobe, which is the back portion of the cerebrum back here, beneath the occipital bone. There's also a central fissure, which is a little difficult to see on a sheep's brain. It's a structure which is pretty remarkable on a human brain, but on a sheep's brain it's kind of indefinite. But basically it's a dividing line between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe.
Not on your left.
On this brain, our central fissure would be right along in this groove, not as deep as the other fissures.
I think it's this.
Yeah.
In addition, from the outside, we can see the pons and the medulla. I'm going to flip the brain over here so that we can see those structures on the lower portion here. Looking at an inferior view of the sheep's brain right now. The pons actually at this moment is partially covered by this flap of tissue right here, but these enlargements right here would be the region of the pons. And just behind it, this other enlargement area right here until it turns into the spinal cord and continues on out. This region would be the medulla oblongata.
Medulla oblongata.
Okay, having located those external structures, we're now going to look at the internal structures. We're going to take a sagittal section, so you're going to cut your sheep's brains right down through the great longitudinal fissure, and you're going to continue your incision right through the cerebellum and down through the spinal cord so that we fold the brain open into two halves. When you make this cut, you want to do it with a minimum amount of back and forth sawing that you can possibly do. Try to make the cut just a nice, sharp, smooth cut, one single cut if you possibly can. I've got a brain here that we have already open, and we'll take a look at the insides of this. So we're looking at an inferior view right now. If I turn it back over to the superior view, it'll fall in half like this when you've made your cut. Okay, looking at the halves here, we can see that on the inside of the cerebellum, here's the cerebellum in the sagittal section, we can see that there's two kinds of material in the cerebellum. There's this darker outer gray matter, and then there's a branched pattern of white matter. The branching pattern of the white matter is called the arbor vitae. It means tree of life.
Arbor vitae.
The branching tree-like pattern.
Arbor vitae.
If we look more up into the regions of the cerebrum here, I'm actually going to switch hands on us here. This one might show better what I want to look at here. There are cavities in the cerebrum, in the brain. One of the cavities would be right here in this half. As I open up this opening, this is called the lateral ventricle. There are two lateral ventricles, so there's one in this hemisphere of the cerebrum. There's also one in the other hemisphere. The third ventricle then would be a region below this, which if I pull this apart a little bit in here, we can see some of this brownish material is actually within that other ventricle. So there's another cavity or another space right there where the probe is running. We've actually sectioned through the third ventricle, right through the center of it. So we have a half of it in this hemisphere and the other half of it's over there. So it actually comes down and actually surrounds this entire region. This large structure here passes right through the center of that third ventricle.
Okay, so here's a lateral ventricle. That's the
So if we keep following on down this direction, we'll come to the fourth ventricle. And the fourth ventricle is along this little channel right here. And as it turns into the cerebellum rather here, there's a little opening. And that other opening right in there, that extra little channel into there, would be the fourth ventricle.
Fourth ventricle.
Okay, going back up here, I'm going to look at the corpus callosum. I think I'm going to switch us back again. Look at this one, a little better here.
Okay, so she should have stayed with that other half. It's better actually on the other
Here's the corpus callosum. And then this white projection.
So here's your lateral
would be the
ventricle again.
fornix.
The white band on top
Lateral
of the lateral
ventricle would be up
ventricle, this is
inside
the
there.
corpus callosum. And then
Corpus
We
down
have an
callosum.
aqueductus sylvius,
That is
which
the-
connects
Pointed
from
on
the
the
third
other side?
ventricle, this area down here, down to the
Okay.
fourth ventricle.
So
It
corpus
runs
callosum,
from out of the third ventricle,
lateral
behind
ventricle,
this large lump right here.
fornix,
and then
Fornix.
third
Comes
ventricle.
straight down through here, and this passageway,
Third
up
ventricle.
until the fourth ventricle, the entire passageway is called the aqueductus sylvius, or the cerebral aqueduct.
Not on your lab end, cerebral aqueduct,
Cerebral
not on your lab.
Connects the
aqueduct.
third and fourth ventricle.
And your fourth ventricle,
Mammillary body is a structure which we can see from the outside as well.
This next
I can
one
show
is
you
the
that on the
mammillary
outside view, but we can see it internally here as a structure that's been sectioned in half right there.
not this one, that's the optic nerve.
When we
This
view
one,
through the cranial nerves on the outside, I'll show you again
Mammillary
where it is on the
Mammillary
outside,
body.
and you can compare that location to this inside location for the mammillary body. The
up here,
pineal body is quite a bit larger in the sheep
That is
than
the
is in
pineal
humans
body.
relative to the proportional
hell?
size of the brain.
The one
This
inside?
other round structure right here. This is one half of it,
Pineal
we slice
body.
through it by making a
Yeah.
sagittal section. Corpora quadrigemina actually means it's four bodies.
okay, the next one.
There are four structures that make up the corpora quadrigemina. There are two superior colliculi and two inferior colliculi. From the interior view, what you do is you fold the brain open a little bit like so that you can look at this region between, hold this here just a minute,
So what I would do
between the
is
cerebrum
get the two halves, fold the brain back together,
and the cerebellum.
Okay.
Having a hard time holding
grab
it
the
open.
cerebrum with one hand, get the cerebellum with the
So
other,
in there right
gently
now,
flex it
we
open.
have a superior colliculus, this large rounded body here,
Does it look like there's two
and
butts
an inferior
moving you right
colliculus,
now?
this smaller body right here.
Okay? The
I'll
larger
turn the
butt
brain
cheeks
back
on
around
top,
so that we're looking
we
at
call
that
those the
where
two
the sagittal
superior
section, you can
colliculi.
see where those things
Superior
are.
The two
colliculi.
smaller butt cheeks,
This would be the superior
we call those
colliculus
the two
up here,
inferior.
and the
Inferior
colliculus
colliculi.
down there.
Since
Superior,
quadrigemina
inferior,
means four,
superior, inferior.
That is one half.
corporal quadrigemina means all four of them
The
together.
total corpora quadrigemina
Corpora,
requires
quad,
two superior
whatever.
colliculi, one from each side, so we need the whole brain together.
So she's gonna fold it
Actually, I
open.
think what I'll do is I'll take this other one that is still intact, fold it open, and let you see the whole corpora quadrigemina. Two superior colliculi, two inferior colliculi, making up the
Superior
corpora
colliculi?
quadrigemina.
So that's the
Inferior
superior.
colliculi, all together,
That's the
corporal
inferior.
quadrigemina.
Or corpora
Okay, back to our
quadrigemina.
sagittal section here. Which brain got the structure that we look at that too.
All right, these next structures are not on your lab map.
This may be very difficult for me to show on the camera. We'll do the best we can. There are a couple of very tiny structures that you need to be able to locate. The first one is called the anterior commissure. It's right there on this sheep's brain. All it is a little teeny tiny small dot of white tissue. It's a tract, so it's a
hell?
place where this half of
That's
the
not
cerebrum is being connected to the other
I know, I
half.
just wanted to know.
And it's just a small white dot. If you've sawed a lot in making your sagittal section, you'll probably lose it. But if you have a good straight section, you can probably locate it. It's right kind of down here as the fornix comes down, you find it right down there at the tip of the fornix. That's the anterior commissure.
Not on your lab
There's
map.
also a posterior commissure, if you follow more or less straight back from
Yeah,
there,
not
up
under
into
that
this
bit.
region, there's a posterior commissure right in here. Another little small dot of white tissue. Between the anterior commissure and the
This
posterior
is on your
commissure
lab.
is this very large mass. This is called the thalamus, or this is a portion of the thalamus. Actually, the thalamus continues back down
Oh, this is
into
the
the
thalamus.
hemisphere there, but this large portion right here would be the thalamus.
Which
Thalamus, this one.
Hypothalamus, hypo means below, so when we look for the hypothalamus below the thalamus, it's this region right in here, between this enlargement here and this mammillary body back here, which we identified previously. This other
Hypothalamus.
area, kind of grayish in here, would be the hypothalamus.
Where's the hypo?
I'm pointing
The
at it.
pituitary gland is not on this particular brain, it's been removed so that we could make the sagittal section
All right, guys,
easily. If your
I think only
pituitary
one
gland is
group has
still in
this
place,
membrane,
it'll be a
okay?
large structure
They
that's
only
right
have,
about
only one
here,
group has a pituitary gland.
hanging off the under
Now, the
surface.
reason for
I
that
do
is
have a pituitary gland still in place
because
on
when they
this
were
one,
dissected,
that's why I
the
saved this
pituitary
one.
gland was removed.
With the membrane still intact
But someone
around
still
the
has this
inferior
membrane.
view, this large
If you turn
structure
your
right
brains
here
upside down,
is the pituitary gland.
this
In order
membrane
to
should
see
have
the
been
cranial
there.
nerve, which is going to be our next
Okay.
step, we're going to have to remove
Is
this
there a group
entire
that has it?
piece of this membrane along with the pituitary gland.
If you wanna see it,
So
go to
that
that
we can
table.
get down and look at those.
This
cranial
heart-shaped
nerves. If
structure
you
right
haven't
here
done that already, then you'll need
is
to
on
do
the
that.
membrane.
But you'll need to be very careful in
We
the
call
way
that
that you
the
remove
pituitary.
this membrane to preserve any small white fibers you can possibly see on this brain.
Now, anchoring that
Example,
membrane
right
in
here.
place are these
Right
cranial
here.
nerves. You guys see these cranial
Are
nerves?
two small cranial
They're
nerves.
actually
This happens to be cranial nerve pair number
Onto
6.
that membrane.
the
There's also other
and
cranial
you can see
nerves
that this is
underneath.
anchored to this membrane.
So when,
But
wherever
we have actually
dissected
several
it,
pairs of
moved
nerves
it.
that are anchored to the
if
membrane.
they're
You
not
have to
careful
locate
of
those
how they
first.
take that membrane
And
off,
be very careful to
It's
twist them
possible
away
they
from
can
the
rip the
membrane
cranial
before you
nerve right
remove
off.
this so that you don't remove the nerves at the same time. They're small and they're fragile.
just keep that in mind.
Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna move to a model.
Okay, so she's gonna talk about a model. We don't have a model in here. So, we're on page 18 now. We're gonna be discussing the cranial nerves. Okay, and there's 6 of them that you guys have to be able to identify on the practical.